Hi, and welcome to the Imperfect podcast. My name is Deb Crow, and I will be your host. Join me on this journey as we meet heart-centered leaders from all over the globe. Lots of interesting questions, interesting conversation, and find out what makes a leader. How do they handle uncertainty and complexity? How do they lead in a time that is volatile? Join us. Welcome back to Imperfect, the Heart-Centered Leadership podcast. And September brings a new season, a season of renewal. And like I mentioned last week, I'm really excited to highlight some younger leaders around the globe, and very excited to introduce you to a young gentleman today who lives in Toronto. His name is Ali Salama. He is a social entrepreneur, a speaker. He's a fellow podcaster. He's an ex-pro athlete, and he's the Middle East Mental Health Ambassador. His team was founded at EmpowerMag.com. It is the first mental health magazine in the Middle East, winning Harvard's top 7 most impactful social initiatives in 2019 and earning further recognition from the World Health Organization. Currently, Ali's purpose is to empower youth to become more impactful change makers in the world by being a heart-centered leader himself. And he also hosts the Empathy Always Wins, which is the world's exclusive youth leadership podcast. And it focuses on empathy and community building. Like I said, he lives in Toronto. He's currently consulting with social enterprises and change makers on strategies to help build powerful community. So Ali, welcome to the show.
Hi, Deb. Thank you so much for this introduction.
I'm
Thank you for having me.
It's a fellow podcaster, but you've won me over. My heart swells to see what a beautiful, authentic, heart-centered leader you are as a young man. So just so honored to have you today on the podcast.
Thank you. It's my honor. Thank you.
So my first leadership question for you is, would you mind giving us a little insight to your own personal journey to show how that's really shaped how you've become a heart-centered leader at such a young age?
Yeah, of course. I think this question, I could take it perhaps in so many different directions, but I'll perhaps touch a little bit on what has allowed that heart-centered leadership or leader within to sort of emerge. Um, during my upbringing, something that I know really impacted the way I am today is you know being displaced from home, whatever that may mean in to anyone listening. I think, but for my situation, it was I wasn't living in Cairo. I was living abroad. I was always trying to make new friends. I was always uncomfortable. Like, it was a very difficult time for me growing up because my father lost his business when we were living in Egypt. He had a huge construction business, and due to corruption, it was an overnight thing that, after living in the top 1%, you certainly just have nowhere to go. Because it was a situation where the family got in debt, and it was just horrid. It was just very bad. So from that position, of course, I ended up, me and my family, just living abroad, and we were forced to be heart centered and cope in ways that allowed me to be highly empathetic and understand that this is life, and everyone has their own ups and downs. So it's something I never really talked about before, and I think that in true essence, it has allowed me to see beyond color, see beyond race, see beyond ethnicity, see beyond religion, see beyond so many different things. Because I think when you are young and when you belong to a certain color, race, orientation, whatever that may be that, may label you, I think I think one advantage that has shaped sort of my perception or my heart to be a little bit centered in a manner that is that cultivates empathy is that I was forced to mix with people that that I was uncomfortable with at the start, because when you're living in a bubble, in a certain environment, when you come out of that bubble, out of that shell, and that bubble doesn't have to be a country, it can be simply a home. So many homes are very conservative. That allowed me to really become the person I am today. And fast forward, I ended up moving by myself to Canada, Toronto, and I was an athlete. Of course, the only thing that kept me going mentally or psychologically was swimming. I was a very talented and fast swimmer, so um, I was always an athlete growing up. But when I came to Canada, I just didn't have the Olympic dream. So at some point of your life, you choose to continue in that athletic route, or you just give into your studies and give into something that really just makes sense in the long term, because training 9 to 10 times a week isn't something someone ordinary does. It requires a certain level of lifestyle and all that. So when I came here, I simply couldn't I just couldn't integrate well. North America is very different to the world. It's extremely different to everywhere else in the world, um, at least from my perspective. And I actually developed a mental illness, and that even made me more empathetic, emerging out of it. And I decided that I needed to do something to speak about, um, you know, emotional well-being and mental health, especially from a masculine perspective, where many people in my culture never really talk about uh, these things. So I hope that really answers your question.
Well, it does. And you have so much knowledge and wisdom for such a young man. And I love to see your persistence and your passion and just that psychological grit to break down barriers. And I know over the past 3 years, you've really given mental health a voice in the Middle East. And I know you've done that through your online magazine, Empower Mag, and you've developed a platform with 70,000 plus users. So as you continue to rally and use your voice with all the efforts you're doing around empathetic leadership and greater mental health advocacy, I love that you're actively speaking for the World Health Organization across multiple conferences. So, my next question is, what imperfections are you bringing to your leadership that you can foster and teach to other young people?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I think self-care and self-love, I think that is a very, when I used to hear those terms in being an athlete and growing up, they were very soft terms. What do you mean self-love or self-care? This is too soft for me to even fathom or just give you my ear and listen. But in all honesty, it's you have to build those as leaders to be able to provide and see things from a very, very, very unique lens that can empower the person in front of you. Because I think that you know one thing I'm working on till today, and it's still an imperfection, is how can I set boundaries within my own self. And sometimes we're always hearing that the kindest souls suffer in the world, and all these you know somewhat valid but somewhat invalid statements, because we aren't taught boundaries when we're growing up. We aren't taught these things in school that allow us to really shine without taking away anything that make us who we are, that beam of light that so many people want to give to the world, because they are that. but inevitably or eventually end up losing that light, right? You have to, I think my imperfection is now understanding that first of all, you can't help everybody, and that's something we need to let go of, but you can help somebody, and that is enough, right? Understanding what is enough and understanding your limits and understanding your boundaries, we can have infinite dreams and we can do amazing work in the world, but sometimes this perfection, this inner perfectionist in us, hinders our progress. And that's something that I'm working on every single day. And that's something that I truly believe for especially our younger generation, when everything's so accessible, when you see people, making, very, good livings off of just putting videos on YouTube, when things almost seem unrealistic, but are happening and they're happening so close but aren't representative of the entire population. When people live on social media and those instant dopamine, hits in our minds, uh, 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 act almost as addictive as drug abuse. And I think that that's something that uh, allows, for younger people, especially, if I were to, talk to someone, to talk to my younger self, uh, make sure that you're aware of the bigger picture, because if you really hone into your own imperfections and understand your boundaries, you will shine well beyond, your wildest dreams. But you just have to really hone into that and not let in, to the outside noise, because that will always exist, but it's no longer on billboards when we're driving in cars, and it's no longer on radio stations. It's literally on our phones 24/7 every time we unlock our screens. So this is how distracted maybe or distorted our judgments can be, or our sense of self can be. And that's why I really hone into self-care and self-love.
Well, I'm a big proponent of self-care, and you're speaking my language, and I'm sitting here smiling ear to ear because it's so nice to see the value and the thriving mindset that you bring to that. And again, the barrier of the masculinity that you bring, and it's not a weakness. It's almost an embrace sense of integrity and humility of self. So thank you for that awareness and some of the great strategies around boundary management. So important. I know some of your education and skills were gained from Ryerson's Ted Rogers School of Management. It allowed you to ultimately become the social artistpreneur, and you have merged your artistic musical talents with your purpose-driven entrepreneurial skills to be a change maker. I know you've raised over $10,000 for your music venture, Cairo Kid Records Inc., which I'm sure has some sentiment back to the days of living in Egypt. So my question around this, Ali, is you are leading as a heart-centered leader. You have developed and become a true champion for mental health awareness and education. What is your ultimate leadership goal that you want to impart from all of your efforts?
um when you mentioned uh, the ultimate leadership goal, I almost pictured Chris Martin of Coldplay. I really admire him, and I went to one concert when I was younger, and it changed my life because I remember vividly. It was, I think, 2015, 5 years ago, and it was a sky full of stars, that tour, and I remember it very well because I went to the concert by myself. I remember I didn't have friends. I just moved to Toronto, and of course, like you can imagine why I became, mentally ill. It was a very hard time in my life, but nonetheless, that concert really stood out to me. And why that stood out to me is heavily important to that question. How how does my how does that all add up to um, make me the leader that I am? when I saw that person perform and when I saw the energy from that person's heart, some people walk into a stadium and they light the entire stadium up. Um, and I like to study those people because those people have something unique, and they're, we're all human beings. No one is more superior than the other. Just people have different intellects and tap into different areas of their energies. And with me, I always found that music was that. And if you were to ask me what is the ultimate leadership goal, it's honestly leading the way that I am, just incorporating music to it, and feeling what I felt when I went to that concert, which was a unique sense of euphoria, a distorted reality in a beautiful way, because I almost felt that those 2 hours and a half I was living a movie, that I was learning so much about connectivity. um, it was just it was it was life changing in a sense that Chris was talking, he was incorporating speaking with music, with wisdom, with with unity. Now, when I come to think of that, and I also think of Anthony Robbins when he performs, or when he um, takes or lights up a stage. Yeah, I think Anthony Robbins or Tony Robbins is pretty high energy, but I think that I'd love to incorporate music in a sense where it could actually be for impact, and it can actually mean something much more than just a record or a Billboard chart. I love to have music create a community that aren't just fans, that are truly there, and that are truly, truly, truly harnessing that power of their hearts, of empathy, of being there. We just witnessed, a crisis in Lebanon, and during all this rubble and hardship, and people lost all their lives in 1 second, all their businesses, everything. But one thing that really stood out to me was everyone opened their homes to one another. In no time, you were finding people supporting one another in ways that, you know, are unprecedented. Now, when I think of music and then I think of my message, I'd like to think of that.
Well, I think you're well on your way, and I love your enthusiasm and your multifaceted approach. And again, you have a lot of wisdom for a young man, and I just really commend you on that. My last leadership question for you is, how do you feel your heart-centered leadership skills have been fostered and derived from?
Um, Definitely hardship. And when I say hardship, I mean hours of spending time alone, because I do believe that some people, including myself, even if you are an introvert, which I am, we need people. We need people to connect, and we need people to share our minds with. I always say that the worst punishment man can ever have is solitary confinement, because that's truly, 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 um, the most painful thing ever is being stuck by yourself in a very dark, place or environment, whatever. But I also learned that, there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. And you really need to cultivate the downtime you have, because that's the time you read, that's the time you gain those heart-centered leadership skills. And that's the time where I actually started developing my own library of books, and I became an avid reader by being forced to spend time alone. And I ask, and I actually ask all my friends that, sometimes ask me, how do you think about things this way, or how have you gained this skill set? I actually lend my books to other people, and even if I highlight them, I think in our busy, 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 busy world today, we need to find a way to constantly learn. I mean, this podcast, and that's why I'm a big fan of podcasting. podcasting is a great way when you don't have the time to sit down and read a book because your baby's crying and you need to, make food for them, or at whatever age that may be. Like, that's a very, targeted example for a demographic. But for younger teenagers, if you're in a subway or if you have an hour commute and it's a very busy place around you and people are standing and you're crushed, you can put something in your ear and you can pretty much educate yourself in the same manner someone would open a book and read. um, that truly changed my life, Deb. I think that that's the only edge that I ever had over anyone else on my age. And I think if it wasn't for reading, um, if it wasn't for listening to voices of people that have long been gone but carry wisdom throughout their work, it wouldn't have been for me to doing what I do right now.
Well, and I love that you just beautifully explained the difference between alone versus lonely. And such a treat for me to hear that again from someone so young, and how you cultivated and interpreted the difference. And again, it just falls back on what you beautifully framed around self-care and boundary management. So good. And I honestly loved your simplistic answer of hardship. And it's all about a decision that we choose to make. We can either well in times like you shared with your family back in Egypt, or we can make a decision to have a thriving mindset and always see the opportunity kind of tucked in the corner of each day. So I really, really love that. I like to end the podcast with what I call my Fab Four. So I'm just going to ask you four fun questions, and whatever's kind of sitting on the top of your mind is the answer. It's those fun questions you don't overthink. So my first question is, what do you want your legacy to be?
That's a I definitely want to be the face of mental health in the Middle East and in the world, for sure. I want to bring a different taste to what it's like to be a man and care and still be very strong, and like Brene Brown always says, leading with a very strong back yet a very soft front.
Well, I love that. And I think you're well on your way, my friend. My second question is, I'm going to give you a magic wand, and you have one wish that you could change something in the world. What would it be?
Suffering.
Absolutely. Do you see how quick you said that? That's a heart-centered leader right there. Now, you alluded a little bit of my next question in one of your answers. So I'm going to reframe this question. If you could have a conversation with the younger version of Allie, let's say the 15 or 16-year-old,
Mm.
what advice would you give to him?
Um, you will always be judged, so be judged for being who you are rather than trying to fit in a construct that you will never be able to fit in anyways. I think that's something that it's always said many times, but until you live it and until people start appreciating your value for your actual inner value, not for a facade that you have on just to please mom or please dad, especially in our culture, that's a really big thing. And minority cultures as well. It's unfortunately something we have to accept and we have to change. But when you do that because of who you are, when you accept that you will be judged and criticized, but when you choose you over the thousands that may do that and criticize you, there's an inherent power in that, and that's the power that the 15-year-old Ali needed to cultivate. And I've always wanted to be a father, so I've always wanted to have a daughter. So maybe I'll make sure that she knows that very well.
Well, that's great advice. And again, it's wise words, and you have so much wisdom in the young man that you are. So again, it's bringing up the value of self-care and how we always have to put ourselves first. And I know earlier on in the podcast you said not everyone's going to like you. And that's okay. You have to lead and just stay really focused with your message, which you're doing so beautifully. So my last question, Ali, is what's next for you personally and professionally?
That's quite a challenge. uh, so professionally, I'm actually collaborating with Microsoft. I haven't announced that yet, but maybe we can announce it right now. I'm starting a podcasting school with Microsoft for startups Middle East, um, and it's going to be called the Art of Podcasting. And I really, it's so ironic that we are on a podcast right now. And for everyone listening, we didn't actually like plan those questions. I never like to take questions in advance. I think that I just love speaking from my heart, and I think that it's so ironic, but when I come to podcasting, or when it comes to podcasting, I love it. And hence why I'm really enthusiastic about, I was enthusiastic about coming here, but I do have a school coming up for entrepreneurs, influencers, or people of influence and artists. I hugely think that podcasting is going to be the medium of the 2020 decade. And I'm putting together a course, resources. I think it's the best way to empower people and um, to empower their inner voice. I think, sometimes when you come to think about how Instagram, YouTube, and all these things started, and how the people that are feeling great about their work and how they are able to live off of what they love, which is a big part of my message. It all revolves around finding the right voice or finding the right platform. And while people may not be comfortable getting on camera and making videos, some others may be comfortable having a setup at home and speaking their heart out. And I'm sure there are so many great voices out there that will be able to use that platform just as you are, Deb. And I think that this is the future. And I've always been a fan of it. And my podcast ranked number 1 on Apple. And Microsoft and I have been speaking about it for maybe 2 months now, and it's coming out. Registration opens at the end of this month, and we're hosting it next month for sure. It's going to be online too. So that's that with professional. And personally, I'm just making sure that the magazine is running. I don't have many plans on monetizing the magazine in a way, because I just really want it to be more communal, and I want it to focus on, like, we have an initiative that connects survivors of sexual abuse and sexual violence to therapists. Now, I run a group of volunteers of around 8 to 7, 7 to 8, yeah, and a group of therapists, professional therapists, the best in the Middle East. And there are around 6 or 7 that offer 3 clients per week on a voluntary basis. Now, that's something I want to take on my own time and not just monetize out of it, because to me, it's my own moral obligation to do that, having the access and whatnot. But what I'd like to take professionally and monetize for sure is the skill set that I've gained after going to LA and Orlando and meeting with some of the great minds in podcasting, because I do believe in this is the platform that will empower so many people in the world to truly come out and share their light and really 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 spread and become heart-centered leaders simply in the world.
Well, I love what you said, and I'm similar to you. I don't like to give the questions before the actual recording of the podcast, because I think it allows for an open ended, authentic, and free flowing, transparent conversation. And it lets you really think in the moment of that question and your value system and your belief and what the answer is going to be. So I'm grateful to have met you and for spending time with you on the podcast. And thank you so much for being my guest.
Thank you, Deborah. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
I like to end my podcast with 5 elements that I feel allow us to be and live a purposeful life. Follow your heart, have passion, do your best, know your truth, and always be in love with the journey. This is Deb Crow. Thanks for joining me today on Imperfect, the Heart-Centered Leadership podcast.